A little more detail about the female reproductive system. We can see the uterus, vagina, the cervix, the uterine tube or fallopian tube, ovary, and these other parts. You see right here, those are stages of development we'll learn about later. And looking at it in some more detail, and here's a vagina, vaginal rugae, these folds, the tip of the uterus, that's the cervix. This opening is the external os of the cervix. There's a body of the uterus. This bulgy part of the top is called the fundus. The uterus has two layers of tissues. This is the myometrium. Myo means muscle. It's mostly smooth muscle. And this is the endometrium. And a couple of stages of development you'll learn about later. More detail about the uterine tube or fallopian tube. This part that's close to the uterus is the isthmus. The middle part is the ampulla. And at the end, we have the infundibulum. And inside of it are a few stages of development. And here's the ovary, and the ovarian ligament. Inside the ovary, it shows development of egg cells. We have a primary oocyte inside a primordial follicle that matures into a primary follicle, again with a primary oocyte. The primary oocyte develops into a secondary oocyte surrounded by cells called a secondary follicle. That gets larger and becomes a mature follicle. And inside the mature follicle is a secondary oocyte. Then during ovulation, this mature follicle fuses with the cortex. This is the cortex, this little white layer, the cortex of the ovary. And the secondary follicle releases a secondary oocyte. And if sperm cells are present, sperm cells will fertilize that secondary oocyte, and they'll become an embryo. These follicle cells that are left behind after ovulation, they become the corpus luteum. Corpus luteum secretes hormones. And if pregnancy does not occur, the corpus luteum becomes a corpus albicans, and that degrades. And this earliest stage of development shows parts of the female reproductive system that I just talked about. In the uterus, we can see the myometrium, the endometrium, the fallopian tube, the isthmus, the ampulla, the infundibulum. This shows these little finger-like projections on the end called the fimbriae. There's an ovary, an ovarian ligament. And this model, I think, is one of the best ones that shows the broad ligament. It's a flat sheet of connective tissue, thin connective tissue that helps to hold things in place. And this model also shows the round ligament. And the round ligament holds the uterus to the wall of the pelvic cavity. And we tip it over like this. We can see the cervix, the tip of the uterus, the external os, the opening to the cervix, and the opening to the uterus. And then there's a vagina, and these folds are called the vaginal rugae.